There should be two of them over there.
Yeah, it's a little lighter than yours. More transparent, too.
Don't talk too long.
Right.
Joe?
You know, I know. I think there's more high school guys? No.
So I have not to talk about early lenders.
But you're going to.
I'm going to. I have
Josh,
a
Tom,
$1 million
everybody.
deal with the Navajo Nation to trade their
No.
rights in Colorado for us putting in water.
First of all, let me thank everybody for coming, and
We can't get the house to move it.
I appreciate it. First of all, I want everybody up here and say thank you to everybody that we have here and so many that have been involved in this process. Oh boy, most importantly, to their staff. No, not yet.
Don't cry.
The staff members have done yeoman's work. Let me give you a little bit of a history or a little bit of a timetable of what we've all been working on, how this all came about. I think you're pretty much aware of it, but basically this COVID emergency relief package started the day after the election. Those of us calling back and forth and talking to each other and basically saying something had to be done because there was nothing moving. We heard nothing. And then on the 17th, we had a dinner meeting. And there was a dinner, and it was bipartisan from day one, from our talks to our dinners. To our dinner, we had 8. There was 4 Ds and 4 Rs, and we committed ourselves to making something happen. And then it grew the day after to where it just continues to grow. But it grew in a bipartisan way, and that's what really makes it pretty special. And it's been almost 2 weeks since we basically broke out, and we said on I think it was December. Let me see what day. I got to get that right. November 5th, November 7th. 2 weeks. 14th. On the today's the 14th. But basically 2 weeks ago we unveiled the framework, and now we are here today. And I know there's an awful lot of you thought that can't be done. You surely to goodness couldn't everything agreed on and put into a bill. Well, guess what? We did. There's the bill. And then, and to make matters even better, we have 2, because with every good negotiation, you want to make sure you've covered everything. And we did that. So what we have before you is $908 billion, $748 in our emergency bills we have, and they're going to talk about basically our state and local liability. I want to talk about, first of all, this one, and this is the one we're so concerned, and both of them are very, very important to the American people. To everybody that's watching, first of all, make sure that you understand bipartisanship and compromise is alive and well in Washington. Contrary to what you've been hearing, we've proven that within a 1-month period, taking something that had not been on the table. Talks were stalled completely and taken to fruition to have a bill presented. That basically what it does, it takes care of those who are unemployed. In an emergency, if you're unemployed, that's an emergency and you're running out of your unemployment check. We have 13 weeks or 16 weeks at $300 a week for that. Food assistance, we have nutrition assistance, food assistance, even going into our food banks, because we have non-traditional people who have probably never been in the food bank before that is needing food assistance now. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity. And we want to make sure that we had shelter assistance, rent, eviction notices. Basically, we wanted to make sure that that was in this piece of legislation. Small business debt relief, PPP program, is in that, and people talk more extensively about that. Then we wanted to talk about student loan forbearance. So much pressure on our students right now, and that's in here. And then it goes on and on and on, as you can see, almost 600 pages. So what we've been able to do is put a $748 billion bill. We have a $908 billion package that we're still, but the emergency needs that we have and the assistance to the American people is something that we're going to continue to fight for. $13 billion for food assistance, $13 billion. And we wanted to make sure that the needs of the people and the assistance that was needed. But again, I tell all of you, the bipartisan COVID-19 emergency relief bills are here. They run to a period of time of April 1. And I want people to know, here's Rob, come on up, buddy. We want people to know that basically the extent. Everyone says, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? We strictly looked at everything that was going to expire at the end of this month. Now it's up to the leadership to take it and make this happen in a timely basis. We have a lot of good people here that want to speak, and they have an awful lot to speak about because they were part of it. It wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And I want to bring my counterpart and my friend Susan Collins up. Susan?
Thanks, Joe. First of all, let me say that I think we've had a Christmas miracle occur in Washington. We have worked night and day for over a month, literally on Thanksgiving Day, with texts and conference calls and Zooms to put together an emergency COVID relief package. Each and every one of us has been committed to that goal. I want to thank my Democratic and Republican colleagues in the Senate for working so hard to bring us to this day, but I also want to thank our House counterparts, Josh Gottheimer and Tom Reed, who lead the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, worked with us every step of the way. So these bills are not only bipartisan products, they are bicameral as well. My hope is that our hard work will spur our leadership on both sides of the aisle, in the Senate and in the House and in the administration, to take our products and use them as the basis for a COVID relief package that is urgently needed by our struggling families, our hard-hit small businesses, our stressed out healthcare providers, our overwhelmed postal service, our challenged schools, and so many others. These bills are comprehensive, but they don't cover everything that everyone would want. Many of the provisions go through to April 30th. Undoubtedly, depending on the course of this pandemic, we may have to do more. But surely we can come together and provide this relief before we break for the Christmas holiday. The American people deserve no less. I'm particularly proud of the $300 billion package that Senator Jeanne Shaheen and I were the lead in putting together. It includes an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program, which has saved millions of jobs in this country, including 250,000 jobs in the state of Maine alone. It is essential that we have another round of PPP for our hardest hit small businesses, which we define as those that have suffered a 30% decline in revenues in one quarter of this year compared to a quarter of last year. It's essential that we keep these small businesses afloat so that they can continue paying their employees. There are many other provisions that I know we will get into in the days ahead, but surely let's not go home for Christmas without passing this much needed relief for the American people. With that, let me make just one other comment, and that is I'm for both bills. Just want to go on record as being for both of these bills. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Senator Mark Warner, who's been one of the leaders of this effort. Mark.
Well, thank you, Susan. Let me, first of all, to Joe and Susan. Joe has been relentless about keeping an eye on the ball. Let's keep this product moving forward. hate to acknowledge this, he was right more often than not, that if we let a little grass grow under our feet, we might not be here. And to Susan, who has been a fiery advocate for small business, this PPP proposal takes great ideas that were advanced in the first CARES bill, refines them into, I think, an even stronger package. She's done a great job, for example, on outdoor venues and other venues, the stages. They and everyone in this group have been extraordinary. To Josh and Tom, too, and I think my hope is the one piece that we've still got, some of us have still got a way to get to, but I have great confidence in Josh and Tom and people like Rob Portman that we may be able to bridge the final point. So, it's a bit of a cliche to say that we're living in challenging times. But also, and it might sound like a cliche, but today is actually a really good day for our country. This morning, the vaccines were started to be distributed around the country. And we're starting to see at least the beginning of the end, God willing, of this pandemic. And also, regardless of who we supported for president, we've seen today, all across the country, as states meet and send forward their electors. Both things working. And then finally, this group, we have behind us, I think, 12 senators. We actually got up to 16 when we kind of called in additional allies, like Mike Crapo and some of the CDFI, and Tim Kaine, and Chris Coons, and Dick Blumenthal on some of the liability issues. I mean, you can't normally get 16 senators to agree even what's for lunch. But the fact that we came together on nearly $1 billion, nearly $1 trillion of emergency relief for Americans in need. Echoing what Joe says, this shows, even as dysfunctional as the Congress sometimes can be, when we're confronted with a crisis, this group, and God willing, our other colleagues will step up and do the right thing. So I think it is an enormously good day for our country today, from the vaccine to our electoral process to Congress actually working. The truth is, as men mentioned already, this gets assistance to lots of Americans who are in desperate need. It would be Scrooge-like if we went away and left folks the day after Christmas to lose their unemployment, or the day after New Year's to lose their apartment. We have, I think, addressed virtually every major category. There are others who say there are additional things that could be added in this package. And if there is room to grow the package, so be it. But I would challenge any member, Democrat or Republican, to say if we're limited at 908, which of these categories would you take money from in terms of people who are in enormous need at this point? So I'm going to take this good news, and hopefully we're going to move forward to get this legislation passed. We implore our leaders on both sides, take this work product, build it into whatever package that gets voted on this week. Let's make sure we bring it across the finish line. As Joe said at the outset, a lot of folks didn't think we'd get to a product. There's been a lot of gangs that didn't get to a final product. We have that final product right here. And one of the individuals who is new to gang membership, but has been an extraordinarily important gang member and a very challenging negotiator on a whole host of issues, is my good friend, Senator Mitt Romney from Utah. Mitt?
Thank you, Mark. I think the American people expect to see groups like this and hope to see groups like this work together. And you're seeing it. And that's what makes me most encouraged about what we've accomplished, but also most hopeful about what we can accomplish in the future. Republicans and Democrats in the House and in the Senate can work together and can take on a tough issue. And this one looks particularly tough. Because on the one side, you had folks saying anything less than $2 trillion was unacceptable. And on the other, you had folks saying anything over $500 billion was unacceptable. And there was an insight in that dinner we had at Lisa's home. I think it was Dick Durbin who said it. He said, you know, this is an emergency provision, isn't it? We're looking not just at what we're going to do long-term for the country and stimulating the economy and so forth. We have people hurting right now. We have an emergency. So let's look at what we need to do to take care of the emergency. And that's really this bill here that Joe just described, where we all came together. And by the way, there's a lot in it that I'd change if I could, and I'm sure every one of us has things in here we'd do differently. This bill over here is less of an emergency, but also very important. And I'm just going to describe this. This last bill relates to two things: state and local aid and liability. And there's some pretty significant differences there. And I'll just note this. On the Republican side, when I talk to my Republican colleagues, I think the majority in the Senate among Republicans feel we should not provide any state and local monies. Why is that? Well, because the numbers are all over the map as to how bad things are at states and localities. Some states have rainy day funds and are telling us they don't need more money. Others are saying they need much more than we could possibly imagine sending to them. So a lot of difference in data and difference in terms of how well they've managed themselves in the past. And there's a strong feeling we don't want to just be paying for pensions that states might have needs to have filled. And so on the one side, there was the sense that, hey, we don't need additional money for states and localities. That was the Republican point of view. At the same time, Republicans are saying, we're willing to give on that if you'll give on providing liability protection so that doctors and hospitals, schools, universities, small businesses, big businesses don't get sued because people got COVID. And so that's the trade-off. Providing funding for states and localities of $160 billion, and that's in this bill, and liability protections. The liability protections language is difficult to sort out, and we had to go to the experts. John Cornyn began with that effort. I'll leave that up, Chris. Leave that one back up. John Cornyn went out with a bill in that regard, and our Democrat friends had a lot of changes they thought needed to be made, and so we brought in the real negotiator, and that's Rob Portman. Rob Portman did a heroic job in negotiating together with Angus King and finding ways to see if we couldn't improve the liability package to resolve the concerns Democrats had, and at the same time provide the protections that Republicans wanted to see. So right now we're going to turn to Bill Cassidy, who's going to describe the state and local program. And then at some point, we're going to hear from Rob Portman, I'm not sure quite when, on the liability front. Bill?
You know, it comes to mind that old joke. I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. We actually went, thank you. I went to Congress and actually negotiations broke out. And we actually came up with something that I think is a victory for the American people. And I like to call this caucus in my own mind the Ronald Reagan Tip O'Neill caucus, because you have a spectrum from conservative to liberal to all points in between. And the point wasn't to borrow a phrase from Leader McConnell, to make a point. The point was to pass a law. Put differently, this bill is not about sending a message unless the message is that Congress can work together to make something good happen for the American people at a time of incredible stress. Now, my portion of the bill is in this one. This is the one in which we have state and local, which is combined with liability. And I want to credit Tom Reed and Gottheimer and Bob Menendez, because we started working on this 4 months ago, trying to find something that would recognize the difference between states, as Mitt referenced, that would be fair to all. So let me just kind of go through the state and local funding over here. There's $160 billion that will be unleashed if we can find an agreement on liability. $8 billion of that is a tribal set-aside. There is 60 so then the remainder goes to state and localities. There's a distribution formula right here. 2/3 will be, let me start over. 1/3 goes out the door based upon a state's population like that. 2/3 will be based upon revenue loss. Of this 1/3, in fact, of the entirety that goes out, 1/2 goes to localities, 1/2 goes to the states. We heard a lot from localities that they thought in their state their governor did not treat them fairly. I don't know if it's true, but 40% goes out to the states and localities, which turns out to be $60.8 billion split between counties and cities and towns. And there's no minimum. You can have 4 people in your county someplace, and they can still apply if they had some need. Each state gets at least $500 million. Now, governors must choose how to distribute this 40% that goes to localities. Mitt mentioned there's a great deal of variance as to how different states are affected. A governor may choose that it goes out to localities proportional to population. He may choose that it goes out proportional to revenue loss, or some blend in between, but it has to be the same for all. It can't be, oh, this city gets a whole lot because it's based upon need, and this city gets very little because it's based upon population. It has to be the same formula. And importantly, states cannot use the money for pension funds. Period. End of story. They cannot put more into their pension fund than they did in a previous year. So we feel as if this addresses the needs for states that have lost a lot, but it's fair to states who perhaps haven't lost a lot, but nonetheless will need funding to enable the better distribution of vaccine or for needs that are yet unrealized because of the continued COVID crisis. I'll just say, again, to Gottheimer, Reed, Menendez, but to all that have been involved in this, a lot of viewpoints have gone into state and local funding. I sure hope we get to pass it because that means also that we've come to an agreement on liability reform. With that, I turn over to my partner from the House, Josh Gottheimer.
No stool this time. I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator. They say it couldn't be done, but today, as Mark said a minute ago, we rolled out a vaccine and actually got Democrats and Republicans in both chambers to come together and get a bill done. And to me, that is a Christmas miracle, as you said, Susan. I think that's the perfect way to explain it. But there is also a reality that we're dealing with. 6,000 people in New Jersey yesterday were diagnosed with COVID-19 in a single day. 1 in 500 in my state have died from the disease. 30% of our small businesses have already been shuttered. Many Americans are in food lines for the very first time. Firefighters, cops, and teachers are facing pink slips at Christmas. And yet here we are 9 months after we passed the Bipartisan CARES Act. We've been stuck in the mud on delivering relief for our families, communities, and small businesses until today. The mission of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus is to help restore Americans' faith in our government and break the gridlock in Washington, the very gridlock that has prevented perhaps the one remaining thing on which all Americans agree, the need for emergency COVID relief. Something to get us through the brutal winter ahead, through the spikes every one of our states is facing, something that is a short-term, focused down payment to get us into the next administration. For the past 4 months, a tiger team of our caucus, including my Republican co-chair and great friend Tom Reed, along with Dean Phillips, who's helped lead this tiger team, who's here, Anthony Gonzalez, Abigail Spamberger, and all of us have been meeting nearly every single day. And for the last month or so, we've had this incredibly welcoming group that has invited us in to sit down on their calls every day, on their Zooms. Even on Thanksgiving, they welcomed us in to get something that we could pass both chambers and sign into law by the president. So 9 months later, we're pleased to have reached a common sense bipartisan agreement. The team effort is an example of how Congress should, can, and must act and work together, and a model for governing in a way that the country needs and deserves, not just today, but in the months ahead. But now with the clock ticking, we're here to announce the 2 separate bills and an agreement we've worked so hard to achieve. We're very proud of the values it represents and how it is consistent with what we've been fighting for months. And we're eager to find a way forward. The Problem Solvers Caucus remains eager to find a singular $908 billion comprehensive package that includes all the language and priorities that we've agreed to in the $748 billion bill, plus the $160 billion bill for state and local and tribal governments with liability and worker protections. That's our goal. Like any negotiation, there are parts we didn't get. We understand that. But going home with nothing for the American people is simply not an option. And look at what it's got. supplemental unemployment, vaccine distribution, which is so vital now, PPP for our small businesses, a second round, food for the hungry, rental assistance, child care, and our state and local governments, all of the assistance to help them, children, families, communities, small businesses, schools and teachers, hospitals and frontline workers, states, cities, and tribes, and much more, all helped by this package. To show the effort continues, this afternoon, our 50 members in the Problem Solvers Caucus, 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans, asked us to keep going tonight, to try to find a singular way forward. We voted to say, let's find a way to merge these together into a 908 package with the language we developed and worked on here, with some tweaks on liability and worker protection to get there, but to make sure that we get that state and local and tribal assistance. So everyone here worked 24/7 to make this happen. And the last thing I'll say about them, and we're just welcome to the Senate today, and I think our visa expires in about 15 minutes, so I'll just get this in. These are not often the folks that you see on television or on social media slugging it out, right? Screaming and yelling and tweeting nasty things. That's not this group. What's so impressive about the senators and Joe and Susan, who've done such an incredible job leading, is they're the ones who know how hard this year has been for our country and our neighbors, how much anger, resentment, and fear still grips our nation. And these are the leaders who recognize the country should always come ahead of party. So I just want to thank everyone who worked so hard. And on behalf of the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, with our 908 team here, we invite our colleagues to all come together in both chambers in the spirit of unity, in the spirit of humanity, and in the spirit of America and Christmas, and pass this comprehensive emergency relief package before we go home, so that our country can begin the new year in the spirit of hope and optimism. Thanks, and God bless. So now I'm going to call, so I'm going to bring Tom on, okay? Our co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus and my dear friend, Tom Reed.
Soon we're forgotten when he goes to the Senate. I think you talked as long. We're House members. We're limited by time. You got to remember that.
Better here.
Well, thank you, Josh. And first, I also want to echo my thanks and to the members of the Senate that have truly invited us in to this process. I got to tell you, the men and women of the Senate that stand behind me are truly inspirational leaders to me as a member of the House. As we spent hours together on these Zoom meetings, on these live person meetings, the depth of knowledge that these individuals demonstrated on each and every one of the issues that they cared passionately about, but also those that they did not, but took the time to really dig in to the details, was impressive. And I got to tell you also, I am forever grateful for the depth of the friendships that now we have started from this experience that I will carry with me in the rest of my congressional career. To Joe Manchin, to Mark Warner, to all my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I truly have enjoyed this experience from a personal point of view. To my Republican colleagues, I have to tell you I was impressed before we began this journey together. I am more impressed, even more so today. Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy, Rob Portman, all of you have demonstrated to me and Mitt Romney, and Lisa, who I'm going to introduce, and Lisa, who, I knew the other ones before we started this journey. These I got to know after we started this journey. They truly are mentors now of mine as to how to be statesmen in the United States Congress. And so I thank you for that honor and that lesson. But as we go forward, I too echo the relief that we have come here to announce today is something we are not done with. This has to get signed into law. As my colleagues in the House and us stood together and took a pledge here just a few weeks ago, we will not leave for Christmas break until this relief is delivered to the American people. And as we talk about Christmas miracles, let us remember, it's not Christmas yet. And as Josh alluded to, I think there's one more Christmas miracle we hope to perform in the House and get these two bills into one. And with that, I just want to say, let us get it done. Not for us, but for the people that we represent and the people who need this as soon as possible. And so I do get the honor to introduce the great senator from Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, who now has become a friend and somebody who I look up to, but also who I know is not only the true ambassador for the fisheries of Alaska, but for the fisheries of the Great Lakes, which New York, Illinois, Dick Durbin, we have had numerous conversations on the Great Lakes. Oh, Rob Portman, of course. We talked about that at length. And so we appreciate you, Lisa Murkowski, and the style upon which you always conduct yourself. So, Lisa Murkowski.
Thank you, Tom. So this is not just paper. This is hope. That stack of paper, that compilation of ideas and concerns and the hopes and the fears of people all across the country. This is hope. This is hope for the individual who's wondering if they're going to be able to keep their apartment after the first of the year. This is hope for the food banks that I've been talking to just last week, who came together on a call to me to say, unprecedented what we've been seeing around the state in terms of the need of individuals who are coming to the food banks, people who have never been to the food bank before, except to be there as volunteers, and now they're there as consumers. This is hope for the small businesses that right now are struggling as we have all come indoors for the winter. There's no dining outside in Alaska or in Maine or in New Hampshire or in Utah. This is hope. This is hope for those who have been asking their Congress to be responsive to what they've seen in the face of this pandemic. This is not only hope from a policy perspective, but this is hope from a process perspective. Again, I think there are a lot of folks who wrote this group off very early on. We've seen gangs come and go. Maybe the secret was really in the sauce and it needed to happen over food. But our reality is that we have defied those who would say their disagreements would divide them. And while what we have presented is two different stacks, I think it's important that you're hearing and seeing that there is a unity in purpose here. Even after the great debates and the long hours and the multiple Zooms, we're still standing here together as Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate members. And we have two different packages, but I think that too represents a reality that when the difficult things come to you and you can't quite work them through, you don't give up. And to Josh and Tom, God bless you for saying, we're going to work to make these one. Because when we make these one, the country wins. And we've talked a lot about state and local, but that heading is state and local and tribal. And as someone who comes from a state where half the tribes in this country happen to be in Alaska, I can tell you this tribal assistance is pretty important. For those who have been most immediately impacted from a health disparity perspective, from the issue of just overall disparities, our native people, American Indians, Alaska Natives, are hurting and hurting bad. And so making sure that these come together as one is going to continue to be our priority. But in the meantime, what we've been able to do is to give to leadership as they're moving through in these final days a ready-made, negotiated product. You haven't seen anybody else step forward. We've got your gift, take it. And I'm supposed to introduce, not supposed to, I am pleased to introduce My friend who has been working with me on the nutrition and fisheries matters, Jean Shaheen, has been a great partner throughout these negotiations, and I'm honored to stand with her and the rest of our friends. Jean?
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you to all of my colleagues in both the Senate and the House who are here this morning, this afternoon. And I want to also appreciate the leadership of Joe Manchin and Susan Collins in the Senate in helping to get us to this point. We know that this country is in crisis. We have almost 300,000 people who have lost their lives to COVID-19. We have over 16 million people who have been infected in this country. We have 25% of our small businesses nationwide have closed. In New Hampshire, we have record levels of homelessness and food insecurity. We have 12 million people who are going to lose their unemployment in December if we fail to act. And I think there are two things that are really remarkable about this group. The first is that we came together of our own volition, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and House, to say we've got to do something to respond to the country's being in crisis. And we did that. We have the charts that show how the dollars break down. I was really proud to work with Lisa, not just on fisheries and nutrition and ag, but with Senator Collins on the small business provisions that are not just the Paycheck Protection Program, but include idle grants and are particularly focused on the restaurant industry and hospitality, which has been hurt so much by this pandemic, as well as venues, which have been closed, and many of them have not had a chance to get help. So we came together, we said we've got to do something, and this package is a response. It's not the bill that each of us would have written, for sure, but like all good legislation, it is a compromise. The other aspect about it that I think is so remarkable is what has been alluded to by so many of the people who have spoken, and I think all of us feel this way. What we've heard loud and clear from the American people is that they're tired of the partisanship. They want to see us in Congress work together to address the needs of this country, particularly now in the middle of this pandemic. And that's what all of this work and this work product attests to. Now, hopefully the leadership in both the House and Senate and in the administration will take what we have done, we'll vote on it, and we will provide relief to the people who need it as we're going into the cold winter months, as we're looking at a new administration coming in, as we're talking about what we need to do long-term to provide stimulus to the economy. This is the relief that will help people to get to that point. Thank you, and I'm very pleased to now introduce our independent in the group, Angus King.
I once said to Susan, you think of me as 2/3 of a Democrat, don't you? And she said, no, it's actually more like 3/4. That's a long bit of history. I think just first a couple of process things that perhaps haven't come through entirely clearly. This bill, this $748 billion bill, is unanimous. It has the support of all of us. And I think that's very important. It's a consensus product to deal with the true emergency associated with this pandemic at this moment in time. And I think that's important. The other piece involving state and local aid and liability, we couldn't come to a uniform consensus, although there is still work going on in that area. So I think that's important. A second kind of process piece that may not be obvious is we're not handing the Senate leadership a concept draft. We're not handing them an outline. We're handing them a bill. This could go on the floor of the Senate tomorrow. It is in legislative language. It's been through legislative council. So we've taken a lot of the work out of this for them and hope that this will be the basis of the package that emerges at the end of the week. Now, there were two areas that I worked on in particular, actually three, but two in particular were addiction and mental health and broadband. Addiction and mental health, we are going through an epidemic not only of coronavirus, but of isolation, suicide, and depression. And that is going hand in hand with the elements of this terrible virus that is afflicting us. So there's a significant portion of this bill that deals with not only opioids, but methamphetamines, alcohol, other substances which are prone to abuse, but also mental health centers across the country, a very important part of the bill. Broadband is here because if there's anything we've learned from this pandemic, among many other lessons, is that we need to be connected. Seniors need to be able to do telehealth. Students need to be able to connect with their schools. And there are huge gaps in this country in terms of connectivity, particularly in rural areas, in places like my state of Maine. So there's a significant portion of this bill that directly addresses that in terms of emergency of connectivity over the next several months, but also in terms of developing the infrastructure to make those kind of connections important. The third piece that I worked on intensely was liability. And I realized today that I've gotten more texts from Rob Portman in the last week than from my 20-something daughter. And that sort of puts in perspective how hard we've been working. Rob and I have worked intensively. We've shared proposals back and forth. We couldn't quite get to the conclusion. And I want to make it clear. Everybody here, including myself, is concerned about the threat of lawsuits and what could happen to businesses, to hospitals, to doctors in a situation of unfettered litigation. On the other hand, there's a concern because when you talk about lawsuits and litigation, you're also talking about injured people. And you're talking about people who have a right to be heard and have a right to compensation if they were wrongly injured. And so what we've tried to do is to balance those two interests. We couldn't quite make it. The House is continuing to work on it. I'm optimistic that they may be able to find the solution. Rob and I will continue to work on it, and it may be that by the end of the week we'll be able to merge these two bills, because I'm a huge advocate for state and local aid, but the sort of agreement going in was that those two issues were related and they were going to go either together or separately. So that's the status of that discussion. But the final thing I want to say is I hope in the not too distant future, when a group of bipartisan senators calls a press conference to talk about how they've been working together to solve an important problem, nobody comes. By that I mean this should be the way it always works. This shouldn't be so unusual as to bring all of you here. I want this to be routine. All of us have commented to one another that this has been one of the most difficult, but also one of the most rewarding legislating experiences that we've had in this body. Sitting down, arguing, differing, issuing our statements, working with our staffs to try to get our points in order, to do the work that made it. This is the way it's supposed to work. So my hope is that we're going to have so much bipartisanship that it will become routine and will be the way that we routinely do business. And I think that's something that the American people will deeply appreciate. I know it's something that they seek. This is a Christmas gift to the American people, and I sincerely hope that our colleagues in the Senate and the House and the White House will seize upon it, execute the work that's necessary to finalize the package, and I look forward to seeing the help that we've offered go out to the American people in the next several weeks, days and weeks. Thank you. And now I get to introduce my colleague, Rob Portman of Ohio. He and I have negotiated with him driving in the car. We've been it was a hands-free phone, I hasten to say. Rob, as you know, has a very distinguished career as a director of the Office Management of Budget, U.S. Trade Representative, and a distinguished and able senator from Ohio. Rob Portman.
Angus, thank you. I think Angus, as an independent, understated the importance of this moment. This is not just bipartisan, it's tripartisan. So we're glad you're with us. Let me just say, I have, I'm told by my staff now, given 20 floor speeches urging our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and specifically our leadership, to produce another COVID-19 bill. Why? Because it's desperately needed. The last big one was the CARES package. That was in March. That was over 9 months ago. Think about that. Think what's happened since. So some of you have had to listen to those speeches. Actually, very few of you probably did. But the point I kept making was there's a lot of common ground here. Yeah, we've got some differences. But look at this. It required these individuals behind us to find that common ground. It wasn't easy, but it was there. There are a couple of things we're still working on. But I think this is a tremendous step forward, and it's needed. Every day in Ohio now, we have another 10,000 plus people who are being infected. We're in our third wave, and it's bad. It's really bad. I just lost my third friend to COVID. He died in the hospital after a painful process of being in the ICU and going through with his family the grief and the pain. All of us have these experiences. This is personal. And the healthcare crisis has been accompanied by an impact on the economy. Some of my colleagues say, well, the economy is better. Why do we need to do this? Folks, I got to tell you, the economy is not getting better in most of our states. It's hurting. And particularly, even though some sectors are doing well, other sectors are really struggling. It was mentioned today that the small businesses in the hospitality area, the restaurants, the movie theaters, the bowling alleys, the bus companies, travel, entertainment, I mean, they are really hurting. The stages, some are hanging by a thread. Some have already closed. And in Ohio, some of those will never open. Never. They're done. So this is the crisis that we face, and I appreciate working with Angus on the addiction and mental health issues, because unfortunately we have a pandemic within a pandemic within a pandemic. And as some of you know, I've worked a lot on this issue of the opioid side of this, and we were finally making progress. And now we're going to have the worst year ever this year in the history of our country in terms of the number of people who die from an overdose. It will be the worst year ever. After we finally made progress, 20 years of this, and we were turning the corner. We had a 22% reduction in overdose deaths in Ohio just a couple years ago. Now we're back. It's the isolation, it's the despair, it's the joblessness. There are other factors too, not being able to go in and get your health care, to meet with your recovery coach. And we all know about the suicide rates and the behavioral health issues. So I appreciate working on that, and we provide some help. I appreciate the work on the unemployment insurance. This is one that is actually quite controversial. And yet this group was able to come together. And for my constituents back home who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, this is what they're asking me about. Are the self-employed going to be able to continue to get UI? If we don't act, the day after Christmas, they lose it. If we don't act, the day after Christmas, those individuals who are on extended federal benefits lose it. They actually lose it. So not only do we add the $300 back in, which, as you know, we had until late summer, till August, but we also ensure that we are continuing the assistance that's already there. Again, I wish the economy were getting better all over the place. Everybody was back to work. Everything was great. That's not what I see. It's not what I feel. It's not what my colleagues hear. So that's all in here. And I appreciate working again with my colleagues on that. In terms of liability, I think Mitt Romney said it well. There is a bill that John Cornyn drafted that's carefully thought out, and it is the bill that most Republicans are supporting. And it's one that our Republican leadership supports. And it was the basis for we Republicans to say, this is the general approach that we like. We have a lot of concern in our caucus about state and local funding, in part because of some of the numbers, frankly, particularly with regard to the states. So we need to have a balance here. And that was part of the deal going into these discussions. We didn't quite get there, although, thanks to Joe Manchin, it's bipartisan. It's not tripartisan yet. Where's Angus? That's the goal. So all the Republicans are supporting this, and Joe Manchin is, and I appreciate that. But folks, we narrowed the differences considerably. I feel badly for John Cornyn's bill because it doesn't look like John Cornyn's bill anymore. I'll just be honest with you. You'll see about half the provisions are either gone or they have been changed because we listened to all of my Democratic colleagues back here, and we tried to come up with accommodations. We didn't get there, but we got awfully close. And in the House, we're continuing those discussions. But just to be clear what this is about that business, which is a grocery store in Pennsylvania that has said to its employees and its customers, you got to wear a mask. And they're getting sued. They're not part of a big chain. And they're thinking, I'm getting sued because I'm telling people what I think was the best thing to do. The standards were evolving, right? This is a national emergency, and the standards have been all over the place. So what in good faith should a business do? Or a small nonprofit, like a small nursing home? A private nursing home or a nonprofit nursing home in all of our states, they're all scared to death. They're not quite sure what the standards were and what they should do. They don't want to get the lawsuit because they can't even fight the lawsuit. They might think they could win the judgment in the end, but they can't afford the 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, I'm looking at my states, $80,000 it's going to cost to actually defend themselves. A lot of these businesses are hanging by a thread. So that's the idea here. It's not to let bad actors off. It really isn't. If you're a bad actor, you should be held liable. It's to say to the people who, in good faith, tried to follow the rules as best they could tell. And by the way, the rules are evolving even as we talk. So that protection, I don't think my Democratic colleagues disagree there's protection needed. Angus just said that. But I do think that we have got to figure out a way to get to yes. There was a survey done, and admittedly this was by the Chamber of Commerce, so I don't know if it's a survey that my Democratic colleagues would support, but it said to people, what do you think? Should people be subject to lawsuits unless they are grossly negligent? And according to this survey, 79% of the American people said no, they should not be. If they in good faith tried to follow the rules. Now, if they're grossly negligent, they shouldn't be protected. That's what this bill tries to do. So that's what this is all about. And there are companies being sued around the country. And unfortunately, not every state has put standards in. Some have, some haven't. But only 15 states have done anything with regard to business liability, as an example. So our idea is do this temporarily. It only lasts 1 year from the date of enactment, which was different than the Cornyn bill, which is 4 years from the date of enactment, or until the health emergency, the national emergency, ends. It's short term. It's an emergency response. It's to ensure that we indeed can not just reopen this economy and ensure that our hospitals and our nursing homes are doing their best to try to provide the care they need without worrying about frivolous lawsuits, but also so they can stay open. So it's all tied into the economic crisis that we face on top of the healthcare crisis. My hope is that we can make progress. My hope is that before we go home for the holidays, we'll be up here again talking about progress on all these issues. But I will speak for all of my colleagues, I think, in saying we cannot leave, we cannot adjourn without passing a COVID-19 emergency bill for the people we represent. Oh, it's all good. No one told me what I was supposed to do. What can I say about Maggie Hassan, except she's been a great partner in this from the start, and specifically, Maggie's a very smart lawyer. Maggie's a former governor. She has a lot of experience, and she brought that to bear on all of the major issues here, including liability reform. So, Maggie, up to you.
Thanks, Rob. Well, good afternoon, and I want to thank my colleagues all, but especially Joe Manchin and Susan Collins for leading us in this effort, and to the whole group, because what you've just heard the description of ongoing conversations, Zooms, texts, emails, is an accurate one. And the agreement reflected in this stack of paper here is an extraordinary amount of work in a short amount of time. But of course, it is nothing in comparison to what our constituents are dealing with and how hard they are working to keep their families, their communities, their businesses afloat, and to keep their eyes on the future on this day when we are seeing the first vaccines in our country distributed. I want to talk about a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. While there is still work to be done on this joint package on liability protections and state, local, and tribal aid, there is also, though, agreement, and it is reflected in the $748 billion bill on aid to our schools and our colleges, and that reflects $82 billion worth of education funding, the majority of it going to our public schools K through 12. Also, some money going for higher education, both the institutions and the most in-need students, as well as a similar fund that you saw in the CARES Act to governors to give them some flexibility to help schools with COVID-related expenses. We have been hearing loudly and clearly from our educators about the challenges that they have not only now, either doing remote learning, in-person learning, or a mixture of the two, but we know that they are anticipating a reopening of schools where our children will not only have some learning gaps or lags to address, but some social and emotional issues to address as well. The challenges for America's schools moving forward are going to be considerable. They also represent opportunity for us to come together and recommit ourselves to our nation's children. But it's critically important that we address that now, and I'm pleased and so grateful to all of my colleagues for working on this with us. Senator Cassidy and I were dealing on the education funding, and as Senator Portman described, we also worked on the unemployment issue, and the whole group on state and local really worked very hard on the formulas that you see. I do want to just say on the liability issue, Democrats are concerned too about the very instances and examples that Senator Portman laid out. I think the differences we're trying to work through is that as we read the language, it just seems to go beyond the COVID situation and address some things that really have a broader impact and don't deal with COVID. So we just have to work this through. This morning, I spent about an hour doing a Zoom with leaders of New Hampshire's long-term care facilities, nursing homes. Everybody in masks, our VA medical center leaders who are deploying some of their personnel to support other nursing homes in our state as they are dealing with the ravages of COVID-19, a virus that one of them described as truly insidious. They are working as hard as they can to protect their residents and each other. They are having staff spend the night in the long-term care facilities so they don't bring COVID out to their communities, or they don't bring COVID from their communities into their long-term care facilities. Our people are working as hard as they can to solve the problems that are springing up moment after moment, day after day right now. The least they should expect from their elected representatives is that we follow their example and come together and solve problems. You can't care more about winning an argument than you do about solving a problem. And this group knows that and has worked really true to that goal throughout this process. And I'm very grateful to all of you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my wonderful colleague from Illinois, who has just been working as hard as he can to help us all bridge a number of issues. A wonderful listener, a wonderful legislator, and a wonderful friend, Dick Durbin.
Bring it home, Dick. Bring it home. Bring it home.
Thanks, Maggie. Let me start off by thanking Joe Manchin. I was originally scheduled to be on tomorrow morning's list of speakers, and he allowed me to come in this evening's list. Thank you very much, Joe. It's hard to imagine it's been 9 months since we passed a COVID-19 relief bill, but we passed it 96-0. Strong bipartisan vote, $3 trillion. 9 months, we know what's happened. It's been recounted over and over. What's happened in America since then. And there have been efforts made to come up with a new COVID relief bill. Some passed the House and others were offered in the Senate. The net result of it was zero, nothing to show for it. For all of this concern across America over what we're going through with this pandemic and with this economic situation, we couldn't pass a bill. Not in the ordinary way, not in a committee to the floor, amendment to the other chamber, conference committee. You read that and how laws are made. It doesn't work that way anymore. And as we failed over and over again to do anything, the American people told us about it. They said, "You're pathetic. You're pathetic. In the midst of a pandemic with this economic downturn, you can't find a majority in both houses for anything." It's no wonder that they lost faith in Congress, maybe in the White House. And it's no wonder that at some point a number of us said, we've got to try something new. So we sat around Lisa Murkowski's house one night, social distancing, windows open, masks on, and started the conversation. And it led to where we are today. Weeks have passed, hours and hours of Zoom calls, and we've reached this point. It feels good. It feels like legislating. It feels like why we were elected. I remember at one point, Mitt, you said, how do I explain to the people in Utah that I came out to Washington to address the national debt and health care, and we don't even talk about them on the floor of the Senate? I remember you said that night. And that's the reality. We just don't talk about them in polite company. Well, we decided to try it differently. Hats off, Joe Manchin, Mark Warner, Susan Collins, Jean Shaheen, all of them. I'm going to miss some if I go through it. Lisa for dinner again. We've come this far, and this bill shows it. $748 billion, dramatic amount of money. And it's going to help people that desperately need it. I won't go through because you've heard the litanies recounted over and over again of all the things that are included in this bill. This is our consensus bill. We all agree on it. It's ready to go. There's no excuse for either the speaker or the leader. You've got to give us a vote. Don't let us go home for Christmas without a vote on this. Maybe you've got something better. Be my guest. Bring it as an amendment. But there's no excuse for us not acting now that we've put on all this work on a bipartisan basis. And then there's this side of the equation. And I think it's been described accurately. Consensus, all aboard. On this side, majority, bare majority, not all aboard. But the two provisions in this thing are critically important. I will tell you right off the bat, I think we should be talking about a lot more than $900 billion for what we're facing. But in the interest of compromise, we stuck to $908 billion. I think we ought to stick to it all the way through. I also feel that help for state and local governments included in here is absolutely critical. Many of them are struggling to get by and counting on us to deliver. There may be some difference of opinion in the Republican caucus, I don't doubt that. But I think by and large, we know that America is better when we're not laying off firefighters and policemen and healthcare workers and teachers. Not at this moment in our history. So what stopped it from being, as Lisa described, one bill? The liability section. Rob Portman gave his explanation, his defense. At one point, Angus King said to me, don't debate him. And then he went on a little longer and said, I guess you have to debate him. Well, I'm not going to do it. All I can say is fundamental to this conversation is fairness. Fairness to the business which is making a good faith effort to protect customers and workers, and fairness to the victim who, without a day in court, if they are wronged or hurt, cannot get compensation. That's what it's all about. We've got to be able to find a middle ground here, strike a middle ground that is fair to both. That's still the burden we face. And I urge my friends in the House, both sides and the Problem Solvers Caucus, take a look at the suggestions that have been made by Democrats and Republicans when you try to find your position on this issue. And that's all I have to say at this point, other than to close and say, we can't go home for Christmas if we don't do this. We cannot go home for Christmas and leave millions of Americans losing their unemployment insurance the day after Christmas because we didn't even debate it on the floor of the Senate. Both sides have to urge that to happen. I think we will.
Let me wrap this up very quickly, and thank you all for being so patient and kind. I want to thank Dean Phillips for being here. Dean has been very instrumental from the House side working with us. But let me just tell you this. Everyone has told you, basically, help is on the way. Tell the American people help is on the way. It's here. There's not a reason why our leadership should not take this up immediately and pass it. And not that we should not go home for Christmas. We will not go home for Christmas until we pass legislation that gives relief to the American people. We're hopeful that both of these become together. In the spirit of cooperation, I was for both. That's the bipartisanship, because both sides have absolutely, I think, compelling arguments and the need and the reasons why we have the positions we have. I have all the faith in the world they're going to come together on this. But help is on the way in this one right here. How we're going to do this right now is not open questions right now. Everybody that you might want to question, they're going to stand. Our senators are going to stand. We have, as far as our liability protection, we've got Rob, we've got Josh, we've got Tom, and we've got our lawyers. With Dick leave? Dick, no, Dick, don't leave. So you can hear from both of them where we are and what we're trying to do. Anybody on everything that we've agreed on over here, you ask any questions you want to anybody over here if you would. So come on up, gang, and stay wherever you want to stay. Okay? Thank you all. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you for staying. If you got a question, come up and ask us.